Hey everyone, this might be a long one. I'm gonna try and tackle a video on unwrapping because this has been a recurring area that people have been having some trouble with. It's very difficult to directly do a tutorial for unwrapping because it's a puzzle, right? So it's a bit like trying to show you how to solve a jigsaw puzzle that you're going to have to cut the pieces up for. Um, but I'll do my best to show you a few different approaches and techniques and tools that you can use for different types of assets and a few things to consider as well, um, just to try and make it a little bit easier for you when you come to actually unwrapping your models. Now, I'm going to tackle a few different approaches here. So I made like a really basic little house over here where I'm going to talk about material indexes and stuff like that. A simple sword where I'm going to talk about mirroring UVs and a couple of just bits of furniture over here. I'm going to show some like a different approach to atlases. So if you watch my video on atlases as well, there's a slightly different method that I'm going to show you here. But first, I'm going to show you a few things you have to look out for with your models. So you can't really take shortcuts in 3D because they'll come back to bite you in the next phase. If you try to be lazy about your model, it's going to cause trouble when you come to unwrap. Um, and then if you're lazy about your unwrap, it's going to cause trouble when you get to texturing. You just kick the can down the road. So it's best to make sure that your models are pristine before you start your unwrap. Um, but that also gets complicated when you factor in that you could unwrap at different stages in the modeling process, which is what we're going to do with the sword. But hopefully, when I go through this, it'll kind of help you with that. So let's get down to it. So I'm going to start with the furniture. I'm going to work this way, I think. And I think I might need to pause before I get to the house to go to get some resources together, but we'll see how we go. All right, so I'm going to start with the furniture over here. Now, first thing, like I said before, is I need to clean these up. So I have to make sure that I don't have, obviously, end guns. First thing, do a mesh cleanup. I like to always make sure that I go to the options window and that I change it to selecting because Maya is notoriously bad at fixing things, but its diagnostic tools are really good. So I'll do a cleanup. No end guns. Excellent. And I know that I've set those settings now, so I can choose this. No end guns. Excellent. That's not everything, though. I also want to make sure that I delete any faces that are not going to be visible at any point because I don't want to have geometry being rendered that I will never see, and I don't want to have uh, geometry in my UVs that that's just taking up space. I'm gonna be texturing and it's gonna be in my UVs and it's never visible anyway. So the underside of something like a table is one to consider. Now, if this is going to be a physics object in your game that's going to get thrown around, maybe I need the feet and I need everything. If it's a first person game and I can crouch, then maybe I need this, but I don't need this if it can't get knocked over or anything. If it's like an isometric game or a 3D game, like a not 3D game, like a isometric kind of third person game, maybe I can't see under the table either, and so I can even delete this stuff, right? You have to consider your game's perspective and how the assets are going to be visible and in what ways. And so maybe I know that this isn't going to be a physics asset, so I can delete the bottom of these feet here, right? But maybe it's first person and this might become visible, so I leave it. Now let's go about trying to, actually no, I'm going to unwrap these together. So now the chair. So again, maybe I know it's not going to be able to get knocked over, so I'm going to take these. And I deliberately did something wrong in here so that we can see what it's going to do when we go to unwrap it. Now, for this alternate atlas approach, I'm actually going to unwrap these together into the same UV space. So I'm going to change to my UV editing workspace, not periscoping, UV editing workspace to make this easier. And my default UVs, this started as a box, so it's just going to be like that, right? Now, I'm going to start by thinking about, and this is my first approach to this, I'm going to start by thinking about where I can get away with seams and where I can't. So maybe, well, probably anywhere that the wood would have been joined on. Makes sense, right? It's going to have a seam in real life. And if something would have a seam in real life, that's easy mode for where you would want the seam to be, right? But when I do this, I'm actually going to grab both of these models, right? They're going to be sharing their UV space, right? This is the other approach to an atlas. I have multiple objects in a shared UV space because they're going to have the same material on them. So let's go through then. And these legs are going to be separate from the chair part. So I select all the faces that are the legs. And I'm going to go, I'll just do an automatic will do for now. And I'll move these off to the side. I like to cut my model up and then go in and work with it afterwards. All right, now I need the main seat part. So I'm going to actually just do this by drag selecting all of this, control dragging down here to deselect these, and then control dragging here to deselect this. And I've just got the seat. I missed one, so make sure I've got everything. All right, I'm going to make that seat one model. So again, I'm just going to do an automatic, and I'm going to put it over here. I'll keep the chair. I'll do the chair on the left and the table on the right, just so I don't get them mixed up. And now I've got the back. And so I'm going to do another automatic. I've got the back. And that's my chair. Oh, I should probably put you over here. Now for the table. Same deal. Grab the legs. Your one thing. And the rest is the top because it's a table. So I'm actually just going to grab it from here. I'm still in face mode. I can grab faces over in the UV editor. That works fine. And that's everything else. And I'm going to do another automatic and put it over here. Okay, and now if I turn on my checkerboard, everything should look pretty good, right? But trying to fit all this into this one space, trying to texture it, that's all going to be a bit of a pain because they're all in a lot of different shells. I've got all these different seams here that I may or may not want, and there might be varying degrees of consistency as well. Like if I look at the sides, the white lines are where the cuts are, right? And so this actually might be a nice shell. So if I change over to UV shell mode, that might be a nice shell, but this isn't, right? I've got part of the top attached here, and this side is just one single band here. It's all a bit silly, right? And this is attached to the bottom, right? I probably want something like this on every side. If I focus in here, you'll see how it represents here, right? So I've got these nice shells here, but then I've got these two single bands, and the other bits are attached to the top and the bottom, right? Which isn't ideal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here in edge mode. I'm going to actually, no, I'll do it over here. I'm going to grab these spots that I want cut. So it's here and along here. And here. Yeah, that's where I want to cut it, right? So that I make this into one piece and this into one piece. Or so that I can anyway. Right. So over here in my UV editor, I'm going to go Shift, right click, cut. And it's going to cut those. But now I still need to stitch the rest of this together. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab these bits. I'm going to go Shift, right click, move and sew. And now if I go to my shell mode, this is one piece again. Just like these ones. Do the same thing. Now I can do it from in here as well. And you'll notice that when I highlight one edge, it highlights the other as well, because every edge exists in kind of two places. It's where those faces join. So I'm going to grab these and these. And I'm going to go Shift right click, move and sew. And I have this shell, which is how I want that cut up. So I have this one big square, these ends, and this bottom piece. Right? And that's actually probably pretty nice for the tabletop. What about the legs? So they've been cut into all of these separate pieces. They're separated in entire faces, right? Probably not ideal. What you probably want is just the one seam in the least visible place, which is probably this inside edge, right? That's going to be the least visible. Because you'll probably be looking at a table leg like this, but you wouldn't be looking at a table leg like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to grab all these other edges. So not the one that I want to left cut. Shift right click, move and sew. And so now I have this one shell, and if I turn on my checkerboard, you'll be able to see that that's consistent. And if I move this, I don't get a seam, I don't get tearing. But if I look around this white line here, where there is still a cut, that's where the seam is. That's where I get the tearing, right? Over a letter is usually the most visible, right? Now, that's fine. You have to have a seam somewhere. I can't have a 3D object in here. I have to lay it out flat. I often describe it as doing paper craft in reverse. Instead of building something up from something flat, we're cutting something apart. Right, so I would repeat this with these other legs. All right, and now I have 4 nice shells. Excellent. And those are my legs. So my table is more or less done. We're going to do some more with it in a second, but that's all of the cutting and stitching that I want to do. Let's get over to our chair. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the legs. I'm going to merge all but that inside face. Inside edge, sorry. Just repeating that. That's just the same thing I was doing before. I'm selecting the edges that I want stitched, and then I'm going to use my move and sew. So I have my legs. And now the tops. Let's see how this turned out in shells. We've got just the top, just the sides, and just the bottom. That's actually probably as good as we're going to get it. If we want to try and minimize seams a little bit, we could do something like stitch these here. So do something like this, kind of the reverse of what I did before, right? We've just got that gap there. We can stitch these here, right? And so the top of the chair is going to be a little bit less noticeable, right? Because this is going to continue over that. But bottom has the more obvious seam. That's fine. It's going to be less visible, right? So maybe we want to do that. Now for the top. You'll notice it had trouble with this. So if I want to maybe have this top piece all connected here, right? That makes sense, right? So I want to sew this. But look at what happened here. I wonder what that was about, right? and everything's getting all wonky. The reason is because of the way I modeled this. The way I modeled this was that I extruded both of these up, and then I just extruded this across and stitched it here, right? But I didn't clean it up first. And so what's happened is I have a face on the inside here, right? You can't see it, and the model's technically stitched together. I can move this vert around, it passes the wiggle test. But if I zoom in, you can see not just one, but two faces in here, inside the chair, from where I stitched it together. You've got to make sure, and that's where they are, you've got to make sure you delete that stuff. Oop, I deleted too much. Right? Got to make sure you delete that stuff. See, I don't have those weird overlapping faces anymore. Because it was trying to take something that was like, had this internal geometry here that was still stitched together and lay it flat. And that doesn't work. It can't do it. Right? At best, we can cut those faces out and lay them somewhere. But then why? We're wasting UV space, and it removes our ability to stitch this together nicely. Right? So you can't take shortcuts with this stuff. You've got to make sure your geometry is nice and clean. Right, let's do the same thing over here. Let's sew this edge. Right. So we get the fronts and backs of the chair. And let's stitch the top the same way as before. So we've got side, top, side, back, and some weirdness going on down here. What's that? That is that bit. Okay. Don't think we can do anything about that. All right, that's probably the best we're gonna get it. Maybe we can stitch these if we really want, if we want to minimize the amount of shells that we have. All right. That's our chair. Now, we have our chair unstitched, and we will have our table stitched, right? They're both stitched together. Now we will need to try and fit all of it in this one space here. We need to Tetris it in. If we're lucky, doing a modify and layout will give us something usable, right? But it's not great for a few reasons. We've got half of the sides of the table over here and the other half are over here, which is going to make texturing a pain. It's hard to tell what's chair legs, what's table legs, right? And there's a whole bunch of repeated shells here that maybe we could simplify. And now I'm going to start talking about the concept of overlapping UVs. So, as a rule, you want to be careful not to have shells stacked on top of each other, right? There are things that can go wrong with doing that. They mostly pertain to baking lighting, but most engines these days handle lighting through a separate UV sheet where it more or less does an automatic like this on your models and does the light maps just on that. And so for texturing, we can usually get away with stacking them. Now, there are some reasons you may or may not want to do that, right? Like, if I stack these chair legs, which I'm going to do right now, so I'm going to select these in shell mode, and I'm going to go Shift, right-click, Stack and Orient Shells. Now, they're all on top of each other, right? They're all still here, but they're all on top of each other. What that means is that they're all showing the same detail. Now you can also see one of the problems here is that they're, which it may or may not be a problem, they're facing different ways, right? So if we look for that 1, if I actually just put it over a 1, we'll be able to see, right? This one's the other way around, right? And for something like wood grain, maybe we want that. Maybe you want to even grab another one and flip it around the other way as well. Just so that it doesn't look quite as repeated, because the problem is going to be that they're the same. They're going to have the same texture on all of them, right? And so maybe rotating one around, flipping it the other way is actually going to help us. But let's assume. Actually, yeah, no, I'm going to flip this one around. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to take this shell and I'm going to open up my. Where's my UV window? There should be a view for this. You know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to look up here. Windows, UI, UV editor. No, that's what's already open. Ugh, I wanted to do this the lazy way, but there's normally a window that opens up. Are you in my plastic? No. Oh, UV toolkit. There we go. I just wasn't looking. All right. So I've got that shell, and I want to rotate it around. So I'm going to open up transform, and so yeah, UV toolkit should be over the side here. It was just on something else. And what I want to do, open up transform, and I want to probably flip this on the V is going to be the easiest way. Right. So UVs refers to U and V. It's the X and Y of the texture space. Now, that's going to be my legs. All right, let's stack the chair legs as well. All right, and we'll do a stack and orient. That's going to be the chair legs. If we want to be really game, maybe we can even stack both of those. That's going to be the top of the chair. And so we might want to think about the way the wood grain's going to actually run here, right? Because it's going to look a little bit funny if the wood grain runs up here and then suddenly this way here. That's going to look weird. Maybe we even want to stitch the top to the top of this. Or maybe we don't. And I'm just going to demonstrate the problem that we're going to have. All right, so let's do that. That's the top of our chair. And now, what about the sides of our table? They're on the wrong side. We want to have them over here, or we want to have these over there or something. We want to have them together. Maybe I just put these together over here. And whoop, I'm just gonna, and I'm holding J to snap my rotation. I'm gonna rotate them this way. Now my habit, or my general approach to doing this, is I try to stack everything down into the bottom left corner. And I'm gonna show you why. If I move everything nicely into this bottom left corner and I bunch it up as much as I can, what I can do, I feel like I can, and I try to get it as square as I can when I do this as well. I don't want it to be rectangular. Right? What I can do is I can grab everything here, hit D so that I'm moving the pivot, hold X for grid snap it down to the bottom here, let go, press D again, get my scale out, and scale them uniformly like this. Right? Then I may as well eat up the rest of this space, right? There's no point in bunching everything up and then having an empty space up here. So what I would rather do is use this space and just give everything a little bit of a buffer. Reason being, you generally don't want to have shells right up against each other if they don't actually flow together. Just in case something like mip mapping or whatever messes with your resolutions, your UVs bleed a little bit, right? So you want to try and minimize the risk of that. So I'm just going to move everything a little bit. Okay. Cool. Oh, aha. Oops. Thankfully, there's a space for them there, right there. All right. So I'm going to call this my UVs, and I'm going to export this now. So I'm just going to pause while I do some oh no, I'll show you how to do that. All right. So to save this out, I got to be in object mode with both of these selected, right? Because I want both of them in my UVs. And I'm going to do image, UV snapshot, and I'm going to save it to my desktop, right? As furniture atlas. I don't need it to be 4096. I'm just going to do 2024. It's just a demo, right? And apply. Says down here that it saved the file. I didn't get any sort of error or anything. Now I'm going to go across to Photoshop. I'm going to open that up. All right. So this is my UVs. When I'm texturing, I like to make sure that I label this and that I work underneath it. I'll even usually make a kind of a background layer for this. I saved it as a PNG, which is why I've got my transparency, by the way. I'll make a background layer. I'll start usually with a mid-tone gray so that I can see what I'm doing, but I'll replace that with the average color later. Then on my UV layer, I set it to some sort of blend mode, either a multiplier or a screen usually. And all of my texturing takes place in the middle here. So I'm going to be really lazy about this. I'm just going to make the wonkiest wood grain that you can imagine. Just because I'm going to demonstrate some issues here UV wise. So I'm going to do just a render fibers, right? And I'm going to call it a day. One thing, when you're saving out your textures, hide your UVs. Because otherwise you'll draw the wireframe on top of your model and that always just looks silly. All right, I'm going to save this to my desktop as a Targa furniture atlas. It's not much of an atlas because I literally just did a flat texture, but if I was properly texturing this, I would spend time texturing details and everything on here. All right. Now let's see how it looks over here. So again, I've kept both of them selected. Shift right click. No, not shift right click, just right click. Assign a new material. And it'll do. I got to find the material. So I'm just going to delete their history so that I can do that. Color. File. From desktop. Furniture Atlas TGA. Turn on textured. All right. And we'll see that horrible wood grain on here. And we'll see where our seams are, right? So we can see it here, but that's okay because we figure that the legs are joined on, right? They're not one piece of wood. But what we will notice is this, right? Which is what I was saying before. These are flowing in different directions, these shells. So what I'll sometimes do, if I can't stitch this for some reason, right? I'll either at least make sure it's rotated, or if I can't rotate it, something I'll sometimes do is I'll check where these edges are, and over in Photoshop, I'll make a layer that's just like a guide, right? And I'll scribble on here in some really bold, obnoxious color. The direction that things are flowing. So I'll do something like smaller than that, like this. Right? I'll draw little arrows. That's a terrible arrow. That so that when I'm texturing, I could make maybe a copy. Maybe I duplicate this, right? I make a copy, and then I can cut this bit out, and rotate it, or mask it, or something. So I'm going to grab this and I'm going to just do something like this. And I'm going to, I'm just going to do it lazy way. Control T. It's taking the mask with it. Unlink that. So now the wood grain flows the other way, right? And I'm going to hide my UVs and my guide. As copy GGA. It reloads over here. See, it's flying the right way, right? So I worked my texturing around the limitations of my UVs. And that's what we're going to call this part. All right, so let's move on to another unwrapping challenge here, right? Which is this sword. Now, I still need to think about where I want to cut it up, where I want to separate things, right? So I probably want to separate the blade from the hilt and the grip from the crossguard and the grip from the pommel, which is sort of done for me because that's actually a different part of the model. That's not a continuous part of the model, right? But I'm going to show you a super efficient approach to this, which is going to look really hacky, but is surprisingly common, especially in games that really need to be super efficient. Like games like WoW do this a lot. And that is to actually only texture like a quarter of this model. So I had one consideration I needed with my model, which was that not that. It's very much designed in half the whole way around. This edge goes the whole way around, right? And even on this part of the model, which is a separate model, it has an edge that runs through the middle, and this way, right? I don't really need some of this geometry, but I cut it this way to make sure it cuts all the way through, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to my top view. I'm going to go to face mode, and I'm going to grab half my model here and delete it. Miss the bit up on the tip, right? And I'm going to go to my front view or side view. Front view is actually the right one here. I'm going to do the same thing. Right? So I have a quarter of a sword now. And this can be handy when you're modeling anyway. Like I could get in here and do a whole bunch of fancy detail in my model that would then be repeated as well, right? But I'm doing this actually for the sake of unwrapping. So now come in here and I do the same thing. I grab the faces that belong to the different parts of the model. So this is my blade, and I go automatic. That's a blade, right? I don't know what this bit is. It's part of the tip. Okay, is that meant to be there, or did I miss it? I missed it. All right, so I delete that. Right. Cool. That's actually pretty much blade done. All right. Then let's get our crossguard. Say it goes to there. That's my crossguard. Cool. We're going to stitch you up the way we want you in a second. Grip. Again, stitch you up the way we want you in a second. Pommel. All right. So let's go through and stitch these together. Blade's actually done. Blade stitched really nicely. So let's get in here and see how we can stitch this stuff. All right. So we've got this shell here. We've got one continuous shell actually doing this. It's probably a little wonky. Let's turn our checkerboard on. Yeah, I got some nasty stretching in here. Some strange angle changes, but all things considered, it's not too bad. Let's see what Maya can do with this for us. All right. So Maya has a tool which helps to try and ease some of this stuff out. So let's try it. Let's go to Modify, Unfold. Now, that flow is much nicer, right? So put this aside, and let's do the grip. So there's just this one seam here. The rest is the cuts and the geometry. Let's see how you look. May as well do an unfold on you as well, just to see what happens. I can do it from here as well. Oh, I accidentally did a layout when I did that, which is not what I wanted to do. Grip, blade. That's crossguard and pommel. All right. Pommel's going to be a little bit harder. All right. So let's see what happens if I just stitch all this together however it can, right? Which, if I want to just stitch all these and see what comes out, I can just grab the whole thing because it won't stitch the places that can't be, like this, because they don't connect to anything. And obviously all this is already connected anyway. So I can just grab the whole thing and sew it. And I get this mess, which is going to look really warped in a few places. It's actually less bad than I thought it was going to be. But let's try and unfold on that. All right. Not too bad. Like, it's a little wonky, but it's not too bad. And depending on the type of thing you're putting on it, you might get away with that. Like, if that's just metal or it's just like a gem or something, even a leather or something, you might not even notice that minor little bit of warping. But you got to think about the type of thing that's being textured onto it and how noticeable it will be. All right, now these are all very different sizes now, and that's what we call texel density. So it's the number of pixels in a given part of the texture, right, or within the UVs. Now the texel density and the different parts of the model are all over the place. We want ideally the checkerboard to be the same size on every part of the model, because this is indicative of the resolution of the texture. The bigger these checkerboards are, the lower res that part is going to look. So we want them to be the same. And usually if we do a layout, it will bring them to the same scale. So let's grab our shells and do a layout UV. All right. It didn't. My blade is still way off. All right. So we might need to eyeball this. So let's grab this, and I'm going to scale it as big as I can go and still fit within the shell. Right? About there. Okay? And now let's get everything else to the same relative scale. So, comparative. Right, about there. Way too far. About there. Doesn't have to be like 100% precise, but it needs to be close. All right. As it is, these could probably get a little bit smaller. And about there. Right. And that's the space that would be needed for my entire sword. Right. So this would work nicely, again, in that type of an atlas like what we did before. Right, where you have a bunch of different things. So if I made a pack of weapons, or there was more detail I was going to have on this or anything like that. And I'm going to leave this as is. Like, I'm not going to try and eat this space because I'm going to continue to show you the mirroring, right? Obviously, this is a bad unwrap because I've wasted all this space, but we're going to act as if we are doing this as part of an atlas, right? And that we were going to do a whole bunch of other weapons here or something. So that I can show you this. Now, what I can do is I can mirror this model and then mirror it again. So I'm just going to delete my history and center my pivot. And then I'm going to make sure that my pivot is on the inside edge here of my model in both directions. So I'm going to hold V. I'm going to press D to move my pivot. I'm going to hold V. I'm going to drag the blue arrow as far across as it goes on the model. And then I'm going to hold V again. I'm going to drag the green arrow as far down as it goes on this model. Right. Now that is going to be the midpoint of our sword, right? So now we need to mirror it and mirror it again. I'm going to quickly make sure that all of these verts along this inside edge are in line, because they're actually not. My blade is a little bit warped. So to do that, I'm going to drag select all these verts on this inside line. I'm going to make sure that they're right in here. I'm going to hit scale. I'm just going to drag this blue arrow, this blue square a little bit. And because they were close enough, it didn't warp anything. I don't really have to worry about my UVs. If it badly warped anything, I'd just come in here and do unfolds on these again. But it didn't. Right, so now I'm going to do my mirroring. So I'm going to go mesh, mirror, and then I need to think about my direction. So so I do need one on the Y, which is the up and down by default in Maya, and in negative space to go underneath. And then I just drag this up until everything snaps. Now I actually fucked up by forgetting to align everything here, but that's okay. Just mash it slightly together, shouldn't break my geometry too much. Before I confirm though, I'm going to swing around and make sure that I didn't badly deform anything. Everything looks okay. And I've left my merge threshold. Oh, I didn't, border's not on. So I'm going to change border to merge border vertices. Oh, no, merge border edges is what I want. All right. Actually, because it's going to mess with this, I'm going to leave that off. Do not merge. I'm going to merge it after I do all my mirroring. Flip UVs is off, but I could turn it on, right? And then you can see what this is doing in the UV editor. It's mirroring them across, right? So if I'm going to leave that off because I want to share my UV space. So just looking at what these options do. Right. Position, offset. This is all fine. All right. I'm going to click off and confirm that. I'm going to click my model again. I'm going to do this again, but I'm going to do it in the Z. So I'm going to mirror. I'm going to change Y to Z. Still on the negative. And it does this relative to the center of the world. So if I want to do this right, I probably should have moved my model to the center of the world. But I'm just going to drag this in until it snaps together. Right? And click off. And now I need to make sure this all stitches together. So I'm going to go vert, grab the whole model, shift right click, merge vertices, and it'll weld those edges together, those ends. So I should be able to wiggle this around, and it should only move. You should move the whole thing. It shouldn't just tear apart or anything like that. This is always my test to make sure everything's stitched together nicely. Because if it wasn't, if these weren't merged, it would tear a hole in the model when I do this because they'd be separate. All right, so now I have a continuous sword model with a UV that's mirrored and then mirrored again. And it's only taking up this much space, right? And that's actually being pretty generous with the space, right? If I wasn't making an atlas, I could probably maximize this a little bit better. I could do something like rotate this way, and then use the rest of this space or whatever. But I'm going to, like I said, pretend that I'm doing an atlas and that I'm going to have a whole bunch of other stuff here. So I'm going to go object mode. And I'm going to export this as well. UV snapshot, save it as weapon atlas, apply, Photoshop, open. Weapon atlas, same process. And let's make the grip a... I'm going to do some filters here just so that I can see the mirroring. I'm just trying to do this very quickly and lazily. So I'm just going to do like, I'll start with the fibers. I will do like a really aggressive blur, so it's kind of like a leathery thing. Blade. I'm going to do a... Now, I'm going to bring the contrast right down. No, I'm just going to do it this way, I think. It's just a little bit of a pattern. Ball. Maybe I'm making like a Damascus or something. Although I'd probably do that in like a roughness or something rather than a base color. Anyway, blade and crossguard, goldy color, perhaps. And pommel. Go with like a big red jewel or something. So I'm going to go like a red and slightly purpley red. Clouds, and then maybe mosaic. No. Crystallize. Turn off my UVs. As Open Atlas TGA. And obviously I would spend more time texturing this than this if I wasn't just doing a quick tutorial. New material, blend, color, file. All right, so let's maximize this. You can see the mirroring that's going on in this. I should also probably soften these edges now. So when you mirror something and stitch it together, these edges won't be soft. And you probably want them to be in a lot of cases. Got to turn that off. Probably not this one. Probably want that one to be hard edge. Okay, so we get the nice little peak on the blade. All right, now anywhere where I have color like this, you'll see that it actually just mirrors, and then that it looks exactly the same on the other side. All right, so you can see on this dark patch here, and then these patterns here that shoot out. It actually turned out okay on the crossguard, except that I got the crossguard and the pommel mixed up, but it actually still looks pretty cool. And so that's another danger with unwrapping is, and when you move to texturing, making sure that you've selected the right things. But regardless, we can see this pattern repeating on both sides because we actually only textured like a quarter of this model, right? And everything else is repeated and is stacked, right? So that's a really efficient approach, which again can couple well with sharing space or just honestly, if this was a bigger, more complex model, it might be beneficial anyway, and we might use this whole space. And it'll just mean that we can get away with a really high resolution. So it's not only for atlases. Another thing we can do is, we've got this house, maybe we actually have multiple materials on a single object. And so we can actually unwrap a single model into a bunch of different UVs. Right. So I'm going to unwrap the main part of the house as one thing. Right. This is like the reverse of an atlas almost. So I'm still going to delete the inside here, and I'm going to delete the back of my door and the back of my window because they're never visible. Right. But I'm going to unwrap the main part of the house as one thing. The window as another, the door as another, the roof as another. Right. Now, you've got to be sparing about doing this because the more material indexes you have on a single model, that it can start to impact performance eventually. So you should be careful about when you do it. You should do it like in a considerate way. Something like a window is a really good candidate because the way that you're going to handle your shader for your glass is going to be completely different to a shader for just any given part of a model, right? And so this glass might have to have something really complicated going on that we don't want to have to try and do for the rest of the model, or a completely different lighting mode, or any given number of things. And so glass is a really good candidate for being on a separate material. And we do this the same way as assigning any material. We just assign any material to it, right? And that stores in the model that part of the model is separate, right? It's still actually attached on its UVs, but all I'm going to do is I'm just going to go UV and planar. No, wrong direction. I'll just do an automatic because it'll just best plane it for me, right? That's my window. Window can go over here, right? And this is, like I said, this is kind of the reverse of doing an atlas in that because it's the same model, it's going to show up in the same UV space, but I'm not actually thinking about the fact that it's in the same UV space because it's going to have different materials on it. And so this part of the house here, I'll just do another automatic. Right? And this part of the house here, I'm going to do another automatic. And I'm going to also go and assign a new material to it. I left the main part of the house as the existing material. So the window frame, so everything except the window, is going to get a new material. Let's move these shells over here for a second. And on automatic, remove the shells. I forgot to move the shells here. So UV shell. And the door. Also a new material. It doesn't matter what I set them up as because I probably wouldn't stay in Maya to do that. I would set it all up in Unreal. All right. So I unwrap each of these as if they are the only part of the model, right? So easiest way to do this is to have them all in a separate square, right? So some people actually like to sort of leave them in these other squares because technically it just all repeats. So whatever is in here is going to be in here, is going to be in here, is going to be in here, right? So let's just do something like this. I'm not going to worry too much about making the most efficient unwrap here because that's not the bit that I'm trying to demonstrate so much on this one, right? I'm not liking that that's pretty much overlapping everywhere though. So what I might do is just move this in a little bit. That was probably my mistake anyway. Right. a little bit of space as I can. And these are a bit of a problem. I'm just going to move these down here. Check the middle here and scale it a bit. Now I am scaling all this stuff independently. Technically, I should actually still be considering my texel density. Having massively different resolutions like this is usually not a great idea. And I would still want to try and maximize my UV space a little bit. But um, again, not worrying about that as my focus here so much as the fact that I can do this and have different materials in these different parts of the model, right? And I would unwrap these independently the same way as I would anything else. But my automatic was actually not too bad for these. So I'm just probably going to stick with it. That's stage one shell. That's one. That's each of these sides are one. Right. That's not too bad. Right. And so let's get all of these over into Unreal. I'm not even going to texture this here. I'm just going to texture it in Unreal because I'm just going to put some flat repeatable textures in here. All right. So we've brought the model into both Unity and Unreal. And you notice that when you select the model, it has all of these different materials on it. Same thing over in Unreal. And we didn't do this in the engine. We did this over in Maya when we assigned those materials to the different parts of it. It's given different parts of the model at different index. So I can make different materials now. So I'll make wall, and I'll make door, and I'll make window frame, and I'll make roof, and I'll make glass, and I can drag this onto the different parts of the model. So wall over here, see it updates, window frame onto here, glass onto here, door onto here, and roof onto here. And then let's go start setting these up. I'm just going to very quickly put different colors on these. So the door will be brown-ish, dark orange. Right, door done. Right, and it just updates this part of the model. Right. Like I said, the main reason you would do this is not for different, just the wall, the door, the window frame, if they're continuous model, more or less like this is, but for ones that are more complex that need to be done very differently, like glass. So glass, maybe we have transparency, right? Maybe it's actually translucent, which means that we don't have this full PBR, right? Uh, and so the rest of our stuff, we don't want to lose this. We don't want to lose our metallic and our roughness and whatever on our wall and our door and all that stuff. Or maybe it's not translucent, but we still need to make it look like glass, which can be quite complicated because you'll need to do things like use a Fresnel um, in order to get the effect of glass. That when you sort of look at it on an angle, you can't see as much, and when you look at it straight on, it's more flat colored and non-reflective, or like the reflectivity changes as you look around it. That kind of an effect, you can replicate that in Shader, but we don't want to have all of the necessary mess of math and graphs and stuff that we need to do that on the whole model. We only want to have it on the glass, right? And that's when this becomes a really powerful technique. And now if you look at it over in Unity, we had the same thing. We have all these different materials. And so I can make a new material for any of these. And again, same deal. They can be different shader modes, right? Not just a different color, but they can be different shader modes, right? And I can put this on different parts of the bottle, right? Another material, make it red, put on the roof, right? and then again, maybe I have a material that's a completely different type of thing. Like I don't know, I don't know what's good in here. Maybe it's got maybe it's glowing. Like maybe it's like a low res kind of a game, and there's like a glowy window, right? Something like that. And so again, that's when this is beneficial, not just to bypass needing to unwrap nicely or anything like that. You don't want to use it as a stopgap because you are losing some performance by doing this, right? You want to do it where you need to maximize your performance. So we're up at an hour. Hopefully that was helpful. Like I said, it's very hard to actually teach unwrapping per se because you are solving a puzzle of your own creation, right? So all I can really do is take you through key takeaways, which make sure your models are clean. Rule number one, right? The more trouble you have with your model, the harder it's going to be to unwrap. Then go through and try to think about where you want cuts to be, where you don't, and select the parts of the model that need to be one thing and unwrap them individually. Starting with an automatic or something is fine. You do an automatic, you move it off to the side, you go through the rest of the model. Once you've done the whole model, you go through and using your edge mode to find the bits you want, right? And where they connect, make sure you get the whole thing. It goes a bit wonky if you just grab one bit sometimes, right? You move and sew, so it's just under shift right click until you get it to add the completeness you want, right? And if you've got bits that are attached by your automatic that you don't want attached, say I wanted to cut these off and just have the back and these bits separate, shift right click and cut will separate these. UV shell mode allows you to move these around. Works kind of like face mode, but it grabs the whole thing. If you have like curved things, round things that look a little bit wonky, right? When you put your checkerboard on, shift right click, actually, it's easier this way. Modify and unfold will help to iron some of that out. All right. Helps to take out some of the wonkiness. Sometimes, so actually, another good candidate here for something else. This is got a bend in it, but maybe we want to sit this nice and straight, right? What we can do is we can do modify and straighten UVs, and it will square it up. It'll create a little bit of a warp, right? But it'll straighten it up. This is that trade-off. It's like, do we want the slightly less warped, more accurate shell, or do we want it to be neater so that we can stack it and line it up better, right? I can't tell you which way to go. It comes down to what you're trying to achieve, what you're texturing on it, the specifics of the model, right? And so it just comes with practice and with thinking ahead. There's a lot of thinking ahead that you need to do, and considering how it's going to affect everything else. What other tools in here are handy and good to know about? Stack and orient, if you are stacking things that are repetitive, like those table legs. Flipping things, so you can do it in here, or you can do it from the UV toolkit and the transform. That's usually the best way to handle that, right? Pretty sure that's all you really need to think about right now based on what's in here. You can try using a layout to try and put everything in the space for you, but you'll usually then need to go and arrange them. considering the direction shells are facing based on their edges that join, right? And how that's going to affect your texturing. Yeah, I feel like I've covered everything that's going to be useful here. As always, if you have any questions, hit me up. But hopefully that was helpful.